About 50 million years ago, the world was a very different place to the one we have now. In fact, our waters were an awful lot shallower back then. You had an awful lot more, if you like, bays, shallow bays. You probably had an awful lot more lagoons. You had an awful lot more swamps, and the likes of mangrove swamps, places like this. So you had an awful lot more shallow water. Our oceans weren't nearly as deep as they are today. So you had animals that spent very probably an awful lot more time quite habituated to the coastal environments where they were quite used to getting their toes wet, and if you get a lot of prey items near these coastal lagoons, you obviously get quite a lot of predators as well. And at some point during the Eocene period, about 50 million years ago, the earliest living sort of ancestors were something that was probably quite closely related to the modern, a small carnivore. Started moving more and more into these coastal lagoon type environments. And as you know, evolution takes place it happens slowly over many, many millions of years. And those animals slowly morphed over the periods into a more aquatic animal. And of course, as this happened over the 40 million years, 30 million years, 20 million years ago, their bodies started to become completely adapted to life in a semi-aquatic environment, and then ultimately, probably about 30 million years ago, to life in a fully aquatic environment. And it was only recently, back around the early 1980s, when they found fossils of was it Pachycetus up in Pakistan, that they realized, well, this actually was the missing link between the terrestrial sort of early ancestor and our modern whale. And from that time on, the animals got longer, they got more streamlined. Their back legs became, if you like, disappeared. It's the old saying, if you don't use something, you lose it. And if we found a fin whale on a beach, and we've done this before, and you cut it up, around its hindquarters, you will find the little vestigial limbs, these remnant bones, which 50, 60 million years ago would have been the hind legs of this mammal. So they still exist, these vestigial limbs. And of course, their front legs morphed into these paddle-shaped, what we call pectoral fins or flippers. The biggest adaptation, if you like, was that their breathing apparatus, if they were breathing still from the front of their face like we do, wouldn't make much sense if you were well on the evolutionary path to becoming a fully aquatic animal. So their breathing apparatus migrated to the top of their head, and that made it that made that, if you like, that change from to coming up to the surface to breathe, the change from the aquatic to the terrestrial environment, made that change, that switch over for breathing far more sort of seamless transition so that they could, they're still obviously air breathing mammals. So it's a very interesting one, and there's still lots of missing pieces to that jigsaw puzzle as to how exactly and where and when these animals changed. But the early ancestors for today's modern whale was this small carnivore that was probably 50 million years ago foraging around the edge of swamps. And, maybe it was as simple as the competition got too tough. And they realized, and this is always a biological fact, there will always be more food in our oceans than there will ever be on land. So there was always that driver for these animals to head where the prey is. And of course, nowadays, with what we're managing systematically to do to our oceans, you could question that, whether there is more food. But back then, certainly the driver was always, the food is all out there in our oceans. And that was the driver for this movement from terrestrial to the ocean.